They say blood is thicker than water, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes blood is also more poisonous than anything else you'll ever encounter. I was 22 years old on my birthday when I learned the most shocking truth of my life. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had been cheating me out of my future. One family comes first at a time. The text came through at work, cold and clinical. No happy birthday or celebration. Just 5 words that shattered everything I thought I knew. We sold your car. Family comes first. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Couldn't process how the same people who'd raised me could betray me so casually, so completely, without even the decency of a phone call. But here's the secret nobody talks about when they preach about family loyalty. Sometimes the people who demand the most sacrifice are the ones contributing the least. What happened next wasn't just a story about a sold car or a toxic demand for $6,000. It was about discovering that I'd been living a lie my entire adult life, funding a fantasy while being told I should be grateful for the privilege. The truth I uncovered was humiliating, infuriating, and ultimately liberating. I wasn't their daughter. I was their infrastructure, the invisible scaffolding holding up a world they took credit for building. And when I finally pulled back the curtain and exposed what they'd been doing, when I let the receipts speak louder than their excuses, the implosion was more spectacular than I ever could have imagined. They thought they could control me with guilt and manipulation, thought they could sell my independence and bill me for their dreams without consequences. They were wrong. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known because they'd never bothered to actually see me as a person, was that I'd been documenting everything, tracking every dollar, building a case without even realizing it. The revenge wasn't planned. It wasn't premeditated. It was just the natural result of finally letting the truth out of the cage I'd been keeping it in to protect their reputation. And when that truth started spreading through our family, our community, their carefully constructed image of martyred parents supporting an ungrateful daughter, it crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. This is the story of how I went from being a daughter to being disowned, from being exploited to being free, and how sometimes the most powerful form of justice isn't revenge at all. It's just stepping back and letting people face the consequences of their own cruelty. They wanted me to pay for my brother's future while they sold mine. Instead, I made them pay for something far more valuable, the truth. And what happened when that bill came due? Well, let me tell you exactly how a birthday text turned into a family implosion that nobody saw coming, least of all the people who started it. I was 22, standing in the break room at work, when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. It was my birthday. You'd think there'd be a happy birthday, or at least a heart emoji, right? Instead, what I got was 5 words that made my stomach drop. We sold your car. Family comes first. No explanation, no apology. Nothing. I couldn't believe what I was reading. This wasn't some casual conversation about borrowing it for the weekend. They'd actually sold my car, the one I'd saved for, paid for with my own money, my ticket to independence. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife because it wasn't just about the car. It was about them deciding my life didn't matter as much as theirs. I stood there, frozen, reading those words over and over like maybe I'd misunderstood. But no. It was crystal clear. They'd taken something that was mine, something I'd worked my ass off for, and decided it belonged to them instead. The humiliation of it all started sinking in. I was at work, trying to keep it together, while my own family backstabbed me on what should have been a special day. There were no "we need to talk" conversations, no family meetings, just a cold text that stripped away my freedom in one swipe. I felt this wave of anger mixed with disbelief, like I was watching my dignity get sold off with that car. And the worst part? They thought that line, "family comes first," would somehow make it okay, like it was some kind of justified sacrifice. My hands were shaking as I stared at my phone, and I could feel my coworkers glancing over, probably wondering why I looked like I'd just seen a ghost. This wasn't love. This was control dressed up in family loyalty. And I was just starting to see how deep the lies went. Every time I'd trusted them, every time I'd put my own dreams on hold to help out, it had all been building to this moment of shocking clarity. They didn't see me as their daughter. They saw me as a resource, something to be used when convenient and discarded when necessary. The truth was hitting me like a freight train. I'd been cheated out of my own life. One family comes first at a time. I took a deep breath, trying to process the sheer audacity of what they'd done. But my mind was already racing ahead. Something inside me shifted right then. This wasn't just about a car anymore. This was about reclaiming everything they'd stolen from my sense of self-worth. I didn't know it yet, but that text message was the beginning of something they'd never see coming. Because if family really did come first, they were about to learn that payback comes first when you've been lied to your whole life. And what happened next? Well, they had no idea what I was capable of when pushed to the edge. Seconds later, literally seconds, another text came through, and this one made the first look almost gentle. You need to pay $6,000 for your brother's tuition by next week. Family comes first. I stared at my phone like it had just grown a second screen, because surely this was some kind of sick joke, right? They'd just sold my car without asking, and now they were demanding $6,000 like I was their personal ATM. The audacity was breathtaking, the kind of shameless entitlement that makes your blood boil. My fingers moved before my brain could catch up, and I typed out the only response that made sense. No. 1 word, 2 letters, and I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The phone rang within 30 seconds, and I knew exactly who it was before I even looked at the screen. My mother's voice was ice cold, that tone she used when she wanted you to know you'd crossed some invisible line she'd drawn in her own mind. "So that's how it is?" she said, not even giving me a chance to explain. "After everything we've done for you, this is the thanks we get?" I tried to speak, tried to tell her how insane this whole thing was, but she cut me off with words that would echo in my head for weeks. "You're no longer part of this family. Consider yourself disowned." And just like that, the line went dead, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding and my entire world flipped upside down. I couldn't believe they'd actually gone there. Disowned, like I was some kind of criminal for refusing to hand over money I didn't even have. The injustice of it all was suffocating because I'd been the one paying rent, covering groceries, keeping the lights on when they forgot to pay the bills. And now, because I wouldn't bankrupt myself for my brother's degree. A degree he didn't even want, by the way. I was suddenly the villain in their twisted family drama. The sheer nerve of it made me want to scream, but instead I just stood there, feeling the weight of their betrayal pressing down on my chest. This wasn't about tuition or family loyalty. This was about control, about keeping me in line, about making sure I stayed their cash cow forever. But here's the thing they didn't know. The thing they couldn't have seen coming even if they'd tried. I wasn't just angry. I was done, completely and utterly finished with being their backup plan and emotional punching bag. As I walked out of that break room and headed to the parking lot, my mind was already working through the implications of what they'd just done. They thought cutting me off would break me, make me come crawling back with my wallet open and my dignity in shreds. Instead, they'd just lit a fuse on something that had been building for years, and the explosion was going to be bigger than any of them could imagine. I walked out of my shift in a daze, my legs moving on autopilot while my brain tried to catch up with the chaos of the last hour. When I reached the parking lot, I stopped dead in my tracks, staring at the empty space where my car should have been. The physical proof that this nightmare was real. They had the spare key, and since the car was registered under my mother's name for insurance purposes, she'd been able to have it towed. They had already lined up a buyer. Having it towed was just how they made it disappear. The concrete was still stained with oil marks from where I'd parked every single day for 2 years, and now there was just nothing, just this gaping hole that represented everything they'd taken from me. I stood there for what felt like forever, feeling the humiliation wash over me in waves, knowing I'd have to bum a ride or call an Uber like some kid who couldn't take care of herself. But then something clicked inside me, something cold and sharp and absolutely crystal clear. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my apps, my banking info, my accounts, all the little pieces of my life that I'd been managing not just for me, but for them too. See, what my parents didn't realize in their rush to squeeze $6,000 out of me was that I wasn't just their daughter. I was their entire infrastructure, the invisible scaffolding holding their whole world together. Every autopay, every password, every subscription, Every utility bill that magically got paid on time, that was me, working behind the scenes like some kind of unpaid personal assistant while they took all the credit. And as I stood in that empty parking lot, a smile started tugging at the corner of my mouth, because I'd just realized something beautiful. If I left, everything would fall apart. I wasn't going to yell or scream or beg them to see reason. That's what they expected. What they wanted, even. Because it would prove I needed them more than they needed me. Instead, I was going to do something so much better, so much more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation could ever be. I was going to walk away clean, take back what was mine, and let them discover the truth the hard way when their perfect little world started crumbling around them. The revenge wouldn't be loud or messy. It would be surgical, precise, the kind of karma that comes wrapped in spreadsheets and automated emails they couldn't ignore or explain away. I called my best friend Jenna and asked if I could crash at her place for a while, keeping my voice steady even though my hands were still shaking. As I waited for my Uber, I started making a mental list of everything I needed to do, every thread I needed to pull to unravel the life they'd built on my back without even realizing it. They thought they could sell my independence and demand my money in the same breath. They thought family comes first, gave them the right to treat me like I was nothing. Well, they were about to learn a very expensive lesson about what happens when you backstab the one person who was holding everything together. I showed up at the house the next morning with Jenna waiting in the car, ready to help me grab my stuff and get out for good. I still had my key, and I knew they'd let me in. They probably thought I was coming back to apologize, that I'd realize I couldn't survive without them, and come crawling back. My parents were in the kitchen like it was just another Tuesday, my dad reading the paper, and my mom scrolling through her phone, acting like they hadn't just blown up my entire life the day before. When I walked in, my mother barely looked up, just said, "Oh, you're here," like I'd popped by to borrow a cup of sugar instead of confront them about stealing my car. I asked them straight out, my voice surprisingly calm considering the storm raging inside me. "Did you really sell my car?" And my dad, my own father, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Yes, because family comes first, and your brother needs that money more than you need a car." The casualness of it, the sheer lack of shame or guilt in his voice, made something inside me snap into perfect clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a desperate act born from financial crisis. This was calculated, deliberate, a power play designed to remind me of my place in their hierarchy. My mother chimed in with that martyr tone she loved so much, explaining how they'd raised me, fed me, put a roof over my head, like those were favors I should be eternally grateful for, instead of basic parental responsibilities. Then my father dropped the bomb that really showed me who they were. "You owe us for everything we've given you. The car, the tuition help, everything. It all came from us, so technically it belongs to us anyway." I couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. This twisted logic that turned 18 years of being their child into some kind of debt I could never repay. Every birthday present, every meal, every moment of love had apparently been an investment they expected returns on, with interest. The betrayal wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about realizing that my entire childhood had been a transaction in their eyes, that I'd never been their daughter so much as their future insurance policy. I felt humiliated standing there, listening to them rewrite history, turning their failures as parents into somehow being my fault for not being grateful enough, compliant enough, broke enough to accept their abuse with a smile. But I didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down the way they clearly expected. Instead, I just nodded slowly, letting their words hang in the air like the toxic garbage they were, and said, "Okay, I understand now." My mother's eyes narrowed because she knew that tone, knew it meant something had shifted that she couldn't control. I turned to head upstairs to my room, and my father called after me, "Where do you think you're going?" And I looked back over my shoulder with the calmest smile I could manage and said, "To get my things. Since I don't live here anymore, remember?" I went up to my room and started packing with a focus I didn't know I had, grabbing documents first. Birth certificate, social security card, every piece of paper that proved I existed as my own person. Jenna came up to help, and together we packed my laptop, my clothes, the few things that actually mattered, while my parents sat downstairs pretending they didn't care that their daughter was leaving. I found the receipt for my car tucked in my desk drawer. The proof that I'd paid for it myself with money from working full-time at the cafe and picking up double shifts. Not a single dollar from them. That receipt felt like gold in my hands, because it was evidence, concrete proof that their whole story about "we gave you everything" was built on lies and manipulation. As I was gathering my stuff, I realized just how much of their lives I'd been managing without them even noticing. Every password was saved in my phone. The Wi-Fi, the streaming services, the utility company logins, the bank accounts I'd helped them set up because they didn't understand technology. I had access because they'd given me their passwords to configure the online banking and bill pay systems. I'd been the one making sure bills got paid through autopay, making sure the internet didn't get shut off, making sure their credit cards got processed on time so they wouldn't tank their credit score. The truth hit me like a lightning bolt. I wasn't just their daughter. I was their entire support system, and they'd gotten so used to everything working smoothly that they'd forgotten who was making it all happen behind the scenes. I loaded the last box into Jenna's car and took one final look at the house I'd grown up in, feeling absolutely nothing except relief. My mother appeared at the door, arms crossed, that disappointed expression on her face like I was the one who'd done something wrong. "You'll be back," she said with this smug certainty that made my skin crawl. "You can't make it on your own, and when you come crawling back, we'll remember this little tantrum." I just smiled at her, that same calm smile from earlier, and said, "We'll see about that." What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I wasn't running away. I was strategically retreating so I could watch their world collapse from a safe distance. At Jenna's apartment, I finally let myself breathe, sitting on her couch with a cup of tea while she assured me I could stay as long as I needed. As I scrolled through my phone, looking at all those accounts and passwords and automated systems, I started to understand the full scope of what I'd been doing for them. This wasn't just about money or control. It was about them building a life on my labor, while convincing me I should be grateful for the privilege of being used. The betrayal of it, the way they'd cheated me out of my own identity and self-worth while claiming it was all for my own good, made me sick. But it also made me powerful, because I finally saw the truth clearly. That first night at Jenna's place, I couldn't sleep, so I started making a list on my laptop. Not a revenge list exactly, more like an inventory of everything I'd been managing for my family without even realizing it. The Wi-Fi password? I'd set it up and changed it every few months for security. The streaming accounts, Netflix, Hulu, Spotify, all of them, paid through my credit card because my parents didn't trust putting their information online. The electricity, water, internet bills, all on autopay through systems I'd configured because my dad would forget to pay them, and we'd end up with late fees. As I typed, the list kept growing and growing. This massive web of infrastructure that I'd been maintaining like some kind of unpaid IT department. I clicked through my email and found dozens of confirmation receipts, password reset links, account statements, all the digital breadcrumbs of a life I'd been living in the background of theirs. My mom's doctor appointments. I'd set up the online portal and managed the reminders. My dad's car insurance. I'd switched it to a better provider and saved them $200 a month. Even their stupid Facebook accounts. I'd helped them recover passwords at least 5 times each when they got locked out. The sheer amount of labor I'd been providing hit me like a truck, and I felt this mix of anger and vindication because they had no idea how much they actually needed me. But here's what really got me. What made me realize the full extent of their betrayal. I'd been doing all this while working full-time and picking up double shifts, paying rent to live in their house, covering groceries when they were short, and basically funding my own existence while they took credit for raising me. The injustice of it was staggering. They'd turned me into their personal assistant, their tech support, their financial backup, and then had the audacity to act like I owed them for the privilege. Every time I'd helped them, every time I'd solved a problem they were too lazy or stubborn to figure out themselves, they'd seen it as proof that they'd raised me right, not as evidence that they were exploiting me. Jenna came out of her room around 2 a.m. and found me still typing, my laptop screen glowing in the dark. "You okay?" she asked, and I looked up at her with this weird smile on my face. "I just figured something out," I told her. "If I disconnect from their systems, if I just quietly remove myself from all these accounts and services, everything falls apart. And the best part? They won't even know it was me. They'll just think technology is suddenly failing them. She sat down next to me, reading over my shoulder, and whispered, "That's genius. That's not revenge. That's just consequence." The next morning, I woke up with absolute clarity about what I needed to do, and more importantly, what I wouldn't do. I wasn't going to steal from them, wasn't going to hack their accounts or do anything that could come back to bite me legally. This had to be clean, surgical, completely defensible. All I was going to do was separate my money from theirs, remove my credit cards from their accounts, and stop being their invisible safety net. It sounds simple, almost too simple. But when you've been propping up someone's entire life without them noticing, removing that support is like pulling a tablecloth out from under a full dinner set. Either they catch everything in time, or it all comes crashing down. I started with the easy stuff. I called my bank and had them issue me a new card with a different number, which automatically killed all the autopay subscriptions running through my old one. The new card cut what was automatic. Changing passwords prevented them from simply re-adding my payment information without my knowledge. I didn't lock them out of anything that was truly theirs. I just removed my payment info and switched recovery emails to theirs. If they wanted access, they could reset it like any adult. Then I went through every streaming service, every utility account, every subscription box they'd signed up for, just to try and never canceled. And I removed my payment information. It took hours, clicking through websites, navigating customer service menus, changing passwords so they couldn't just add my card back. With each account I cleaned out, I felt lighter, like I was shedding layers of responsibility that had never actually been mine to carry in the first place. The genius of it was that none of this would hit immediately. Autopay systems usually give you a grace period, send warning emails before they shut off service. I updated the contact email to theirs. If they missed the warnings, it was because they never paid attention. Ava always did. I forwarded my important stuff to a new email account they didn't know about, and I stopped using the old one, activating forwarding only for what was actually mine. Every step was calculated. Every move designed to create maximum chaos while keeping my hands completely clean. Jenna watched me work with this mix of awe and concern, finally asking, "Are you sure about this? Once you pull this thread, there's no putting it back." I looked at her and felt this surge of conviction, this bone-deep certainty that what I was doing wasn't just justified, it was necessary. "They sold my car and demanded $6,000 in the same breath," I reminded her. "They called me selfish for not bankrupting myself for a degree my brother doesn't even want. This isn't revenge, Jenna. This is just me stopping the cycle of abuse and letting them face the consequences of their own choices." And then I clicked confirm on the last account change, feeling something settle into place inside me. Now here's where things get interesting, where all those months of being the responsible one were about to pay off in the most unexpected way. About 6 months earlier, I'd created this budgeting app/spreadsheet system I called HomeFlow. Nothing fancy, just a way to track household expenses and see where money was actually going. I'd pitched it to my parents as a family project, something to help us all stay organized, and they'd nodded along like it was a cute hobby while continuing to have zero idea how money actually worked. What they didn't know was that HomeFlow was connected to everything: bank statements, credit card transactions, utility bills. Every financial move our household made got logged and categorized automatically. They'd given me access to set everything up, authorizing me to download their statements and export their transaction data because they didn't understand technology. The system just organized the monthly statements and reports they'd authorized me to access. I'd set it up mostly for myself, trying to figure out why I was always broke despite working 40 hours a week, and what I discovered had been shocking even to me. The numbers didn't lie. I was paying nearly 60% of the household expenses, while my parents kept up this charade that they were supporting me out of the goodness of their hearts. Rent, groceries, utilities, internet, subscriptions, random emergencies they claimed they'd cover me for later. It was all there in neat little graphs and charts, time-stamped and categorized. I'd kept updating it religiously, thinking maybe one day I'd have the courage to show them the truth. But I'd never quite worked up the nerve. Until now, sitting in Jenna's apartment with my laptop open, I pulled up HomeFlow and just stared at it for a solid minute. This beautiful weapon I'd accidentally built without even knowing it. Every receipt was there, every transaction, every Venmo request I'd fulfilled when they were just a little short this month. The data went back almost 2 years, showing a pattern so clear and damning that even my parents' most dedicated enablers wouldn't be able to deny it. This wasn't opinion or emotion. This was math. Cold hard numbers that proved exactly what they'd been doing to me while claiming I was the selfish one. I'd already been keeping these records as a habit, so organizing them into a shareable folder took just minutes. The best part? HomeFlow had this feature I'd built in where you could generate automated reports and send them to multiple email addresses at once, like a monthly budget update for everyone in the household. They didn't check email unless it was something that touched their image. Church, family, official-looking stuff. But the feature was there, waiting, like a loaded gun on the wall in the first act of a play. My finger hovered over the settings menu, my heart racing as I realized what I was about to do. This wasn't just disconnecting services or removing credit cards. This was about to expose the truth to everyone, in a way they couldn't ignore, deny, or explain away. I sat there staring at the HomeFlow settings panel, my cursor hovering over the recipient list like I was defusing a bomb instead of setting one off. The default recipients were just me and my parents. But I had the ability to add anyone with an email address, and that's when inspiration hit me like a lightning bolt. My Aunt Brenda, my mom's sister, who she was always trying to impress with stories about what a perfect family we were. My grandmother Evelyn, who my mom called every Sunday to brag about how well she was managing the household. A few family friends, the neighbors my parents were always performing for at backyard barbecues. I added them all, one by one, watching the list grow with this giddy sense of anticipation. The report I configured wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It was a complete financial autopsy of our household, broken down by category and contributor. It showed who paid for what, when, and how much, with pretty color-coded charts that even the least financially literate person could understand at a glance. I redacted account numbers and balances. This wasn't doxing. It was a contribution breakdown. Instead of screenshots directly from bank accounts, I used the monthly statements and transaction exports they'd authorized me to access. More plausible, more professional, completely legitimate. The contrast was devastating. My contributions in dark blue, taking up more than half of every single chart, while my parents' contributions were this sad little sliver of green that barely registered. I added a summary section at the top that calculated percentages, and seeing it laid out like that, me covering 62% of household costs while being told I owed them, made me want to laugh and cry at the same tea. I scheduled the report to send at 7 a.m. the next morning, right when I knew my mom would be having her coffee and checking her phone, when my dad would be getting ready for work and probably scrolling through emails. The subject line I chose was simple, clinical, deliberately non-accusatory. HomeFlow Monthly Financial Report, Household Expense Breakdown. Nothing that would set off alarm bells, nothing that screamed, "Your daughter is about to burn your reputation to the ground." Just a helpful financial summary, the kind of thing a responsible, organized person would send to keep everyone informed. The irony was delicious. As I hit the schedule button, I felt this rush of something that wasn't quite revenge but wasn't quite justice either. It was more like truth finally getting its moment in the spotlight after being shoved in a closet for years. Jenna leaned over my shoulder and whispered, "Holy shit, you're really doing this." And I nodded, closing my laptop with a finality that felt like closing a chapter of my life. "They wanted family to come first," I said, smiling at her. "Well, now, the whole family gets to see the receipts." What I didn't know yet was just how spectacular the explosion would be when that email landed in 15 inboxes simultaneously. I barely slept that night, checking my phone every hour like I was waiting for news about a natural disaster, which, in a way, I was. At 7:02 a.m., my phone started buzzing with email notifications, but not from my parents, from the HomeFlow system itself, confirming that the report had been successfully delivered to all 15 recipients. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, imagining my mother's face as she opened that email and saw 2 years of financial data staring back at her in charts she couldn't deny or spin. The beauty of it was that I hadn't written a single accusatory word. I'd just let the numbers speak for themselves, and numbers don't lie the way people do. By 7:15, my phone started ringing, but I'd already silenced calls from my parents' numbers, so I just watched their names flash on the screen over and over. Then came the texts, first from my mom. "What is this? Call me now." Then from my dad. "You need to explain this report immediately." But the messages that really made my morning were the ones from Aunt Brenda and Grandma Evelyn, asking gentle questions like, "Honey, is this accurate?" And, "I had no idea you were contributing so much." The cracks in my parents' perfect facade were already starting to show, and the sun hadn't even fully risen yet. The real chaos started around 8 a.m., when my mom must have realized that this wasn't just sent to her. It had gone to everyone who mattered in her social circle. That's when the family group chat exploded. My mother posting this long, frantic message about how the report was taken out of context, and I was exaggerating my contributions, and how they'd given me so much more than money. My dad jumped in trying to claim it was a hacker, that someone had compromised the system and fabricated the data, which would have been almost believable except the report included actual documentation of monthly statements and transaction records with dates and transaction numbers. Every time they tried to rewrite the story, the evidence just sat there, cold and factual, making them look more desperate. Aunt Brenda was the first to really call them out, posting a screenshot of one particular month where I'd covered the entire electric bill, the internet, groceries, and gas, while my parents had contributed exactly $0 to household expenses. "This doesn't look out of context to me," she wrote. "This looks like financial abuse." Grandma Evelyn chimed in with questions they couldn't answer. If she was living rent-free as a favor, why was she paying for utilities? If you were supporting her, where's your money in these charts? The dominoes were falling exactly as I'd hoped, each question exposing another layer of the lies they'd been telling themselves and everyone else. My mother's next move was predictable but still breathtaking in its audacity. She started a separate group chat without me, probably thinking I wouldn't find out, but Aunt Brenda screenshotted everything and sent it to me within minutes. In this private chat, my mom was spinning this whole narrative about how I'd always been difficult and ungrateful, how they'd tried so hard to teach me family values, but I'd turned out selfish and money-obsessed. She claimed the home flow data was manipulated, that I'd inflated my contributions and hidden theirs, that I was having some kind of mental breakdown and needed intervention. The lies were so elaborate, so detailed, that for a second I almost admired the creativity it took to construct that much fiction on the spot. But here's what she didn't count on. I'd been thorough. I hadn't just sent the home flow report. I'd saved every single receipt, every Venmo screenshot, every text message where they'd asked me to cover them just this once. When Aunt Brenda forwarded me my mother's claims, I simply replied to the original group chat with a Google Drive link labeled Supporting Documentation that contained 2 years of proof organized by month and category. Bank statements showing my direct deposits and where the money went. Screenshots of texts where my dad promised to pay me back next week for the internet bill, dated 18 months ago with no follow-up payment. Photos of grocery receipts with my signature at the bottom, week after week after week. The silence in the group chat after I posted that link was deafening, the digital equivalent of a room going completely quiet after someone drops a bomb. Then Grandma Evelyn broke it with 5 words that probably made my mother's blood run cold. "I've reviewed the documents. Everything checks out." My dad tried one last desperate play, posting that I'd hacked into their accounts and fabricated everything, that this was identity theft, and he was considering legal action. But Aunt Brenda shut that down immediately. "So you're saying you want to involve lawyers? Because I think that's a great idea. Let's get professionals to examine these records and see who's telling the truth." That's when my mother made her biggest mistake. She called me directly, and I actually answered, putting her on speaker so Jenna could hear. She didn't ask how I was doing or try to apologize. She went straight to threats, her voice shaking with rage as she told me I was destroying the family, that I was humiliating them in front of everyone who mattered. "You want revenge? Fine, you got it," she hissed. "But when this is over, when you've burned every bridge and you're alone, don't come crying to us." I let her finish, let her vent all that poison. And then I said very calmly, Mom, this isn't revenge. This is just the truth. If the truth destroys you, maybe the problem isn't me. And I hung up, my hands shaking but my conscience completely clear. What happened next I genuinely didn't see coming. My brother Mason showed up at Jenna's apartment 3 days after the home flow report detonated our family. He stood at the door looking uncomfortable, hands shoved in his pockets, and I almost didn't let him in because I figured he was there to deliver some message from our parents or guilt trip me into backing down. But when Jenna opened the door wider and he saw my face, the first thing he said was, "I had no idea. I swear to God, I had no idea they were doing that to you." The raw honesty in his voice caught me completely off guard, and I felt my defensive walls crack just a little. We sat on Jenna's couch and he showed me his phone. Dozens of messages from our parents telling him about the college fund they'd supposedly saved for him, the opportunities they were creating, the sacrifices they were making to ensure his future. "They told me it was their money," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "They said they'd been planning this for years, setting aside savings. They never once mentioned that you were the one actually paying for everything, that they'd sold your car to squeeze more out of you." The betrayal in his eyes mirrored my own, and I realized that Mason had been a pawn in this game just like me, used as leverage and excuse for our parents' greed and control. Then he hit me with something that made the whole situation even more twisted. "I don't even want to go to that school," he admitted, staring at his hands. "I never did. That engineering program they're obsessed with? That's Dad's dream, not mine. I want to do graphic design, maybe animation. But every time I bring it up, they tell me I'm being childish and unrealistic." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They'd destroyed my financial stability, sold my car, and demanded $6,000 for a degree my brother didn't even want. All so they could live out some fantasy of having a successful engineer son they could brag about at dinner parties. Mason pulled out his laptop and showed me the acceptance letter to the art school he'd applied to in secret, the portfolio he'd been building at night when our parents thought he was studying. "I'm not going to let them use me as an excuse to abuse you anymore," he said firmly. "I'm going to tell them the truth, that I'm not taking their money, I'm not going to that engineering program, and if they have a problem with that, they can deal with it themselves." Watching my little brother stand up to the same people who'd controlled both our lives felt like witnessing someone step out of shadows into sunlight. He wasn't the golden child anymore. He was just another person trying to reclaim his dignity from parents who saw their kids as investments rather than human beings. About a week after the home flow report went nuclear, my dad made what might have been the single dumbest decision of this entire saga. He posted on Facebook. Not a subtle post either, but a full-blown manifesto about ungrateful children, family loyalty, and how hard it is to raise kids in today's entitled generation. He painted himself as this martyred father who'd sacrificed everything for his daughter, only to be stabbed in the back when he needed support for his son's education. The post was clearly designed to rally sympathy, to rewrite the narrative before it got completely away from him. But what he didn't account for was that half his Facebook friends had already received the home flow report, or heard about it through the family grapevine. The comment section turned into a bloodbath within hours. Neighbors who'd seen me lugging groceries into the house every week started asking pointed questions. "Wait, didn't she pay rent? I remember her mentioning that." Family friends chimed in with their own observations. "I always thought it was strange that she worked full-time but never seemed to have money for herself." Then Aunt Brenda went nuclear and posted a link to the home flow report directly in the comments with the caption, "Since we're talking about family loyalty, maybe everyone should see the actual numbers." My dad tried to delete her comment, but screenshots spread faster than he could control, and suddenly his pity party turned into a public trial. The real damage came when people started connecting dots they'd previously ignored. My mom's coworker commented asking if this was why my mother always had designer bags but claimed to be struggling financially. Someone from my dad's bowling league pointed out that they'd just gotten back from a cruise 2 months ago. How broke could they really be if they were taking vacations while demanding money from their daughter? Every attempt my parents made to explain or justify just dug the hole deeper, because the numbers didn't care about their excuses. You can't claim poverty when the receipts show you going to fancy restaurants while your daughter was covering the electric bill. My phone buzzed with a screenshot from Mason. Our dad had finally taken down the Facebook post, but not before it had been shared 47 times and commented on over 200. "He's losing it," Mason texted. "Mom's been on the phone all day doing damage control, but nobody's buying what she's selling anymore." I stared at that screenshot, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but was close. This was karma. Pure and simple. The natural consequence of building a life on lies and hoping nobody would ever check the receipts. They'd wanted to humiliate me, to paint me as the villain in their story, but all they'd done was expose themselves to everyone who mattered in their carefully curated social world. Things took a darker turn about 10 days into this whole mess when Mason called me at 11 p.m., his voice shaking in a way that immediately put me on high alert. "Can I come over?" he asked, and I could hear something in the background. Our mother's voice, high-pitched and frantic. Our father's deeper tone cutting through. I told him yes without hesitation, and 20 minutes later he showed up at Jenna's door with a red mark on his shoulder and this look in his eyes that I recognized because I'd seen it in the mirror plenty of times. "He pushed me," Mason said quietly, almost like he couldn't believe it himself. "I told them I wasn't taking their money for that engineering program and Dad just lost it." Jenna immediately started asking if he was okay, checking the mark on his shoulder while I felt this cold rage settling into my chest. Mason explained what happened. Our father had been drinking, getting more and more agitated as the day went on. Probably because another relative had called to ask uncomfortable questions about the home flow report. When Mason announced his decision to pursue graphic design instead, our dad had exploded, screaming about wasted potential and disrespect. And when Mason stood his ground, our father had physically shoved him against the wall. "Mom just stood there," Mason said, his voice cracking. "She watched it happen, and then told me I was being dramatic when I said I was leaving." I pulled out my phone and started recording as Mason told the story again, making sure we had his account documented with timestamps and details while everything was fresh. This wasn't just financial abuse anymore. This was physical violence, the kind of escalation that happens when controlling people realize they're losing their grip on power. Jenna suggested we call the police, file a report, but Mason wasn't ready for that yet, still processing the shock of his own father putting hands on him. He was afraid of what an official report might cause, but I wasn't going to let this pass. Instead, we took photos of the mark on his shoulder, screenshots of the threatening texts our mother had sent when he left, building a file of evidence that showed a pattern of abuse that went way beyond money. We documented everything and kept the evidence safe. Aunt Brenda needed to know about this, and when I called her the next morning and explained what happened, the silence on her end was deafening. Finally, she said, "I'm coming over, and I'm bringing your grandmother. This stops now. What my parents had done to me was bad enough, but watching them turn on Mason, their supposed golden child, the one they claimed all this was for, proved what I'd suspected all along. It was never about family loyalty or helping anyone succeed. It was about control, about keeping us dependent and compliant, and when that control slipped, they'd resort to anything to get it back, even violence." With Mason safe at Jenna's apartment and the physical abuse now documented, I realized it was time to deploy the second phase of my plan. Something I'd been holding back because I wanted to give my parents a chance to come clean on their own. That chance had officially expired the moment my father put his hands on my brother. I logged back into HomeFlow, but this time instead of sending a one-time report, I set up automated recurring reports that would go out every single week with updated financial data, late payment alerts, and a running tally of bills that weren't getting paid now that I'd removed my cards from their accounts. The genius of the recurring reports was that they created sustained pressure instead of a single explosive moment. Every Monday morning at 7 a.m., everyone on that email list would get a fresh reminder of exactly what was happening in my parents' household, which bills were overdue, which services had been disconnected, how much they'd spent on non-essentials while claiming they couldn't afford necessities. I added a new feature too, a comparison chart showing their spending before and after I left, making it crystal clear just how much of their comfortable lifestyle had been built on my silent financial support. The data didn't just tell a story, it told the truth, week after week, with no way for them to bury it or move on. I also configured the system to send alerts to specific people when certain thresholds were hit. If a utility bill went 30 days overdue, Grandma Evelyn got notified. If they racked up overdraft fees, Aunt Brenda received an alert. If they spent over $200 on restaurants in a single week while claiming poverty, the whole family group chat got a summary. It wasn't about being cruel or vindictive. It was about making sure that everyone who'd been told I was the problem could see with their own eyes who was really being irresponsible. The truth was doing all the heavy lifting. I was just making sure it had a megaphone. The really beautiful part was that these reports started reaching people outside our immediate family circle. Brenda started dropping screenshots into the family chat before my parents could spin anything. Friends from church who my mother had been asking for support during this difficult time. Co-workers who my father had been complaining to about his ungrateful daughter. Even some of the parents from Mason's old school who my mother loved to network with. They were all seeing the weekly updates. Each report was a tiny crack in the reputation they'd spent years building, and those cracks were starting to become canyons they couldn't bridge with excuses or charm. Jenna watched me set up the final automated trigger and asked if I thought I was going too far. And I showed her the photo of the bruise on Mason's shoulder. They went too far, I said simply. I'm just making sure everyone knows it. Mason made his decision about a week after moving in with me and Jenna. He wasn't going back, and he wasn't taking a single dollar of our parents' money for any school, engineering, or otherwise. Instead, he got a job at a local coffee shop, started taking community college classes in graphic design that he could actually afford, and began building a portfolio with work that actually meant something to him. Watching him choose his own path, even though it was harder and slower than the one our parents had tried to force on him, was like watching someone learn to breathe after being underwater for years. He wasn't their investment anymore. He was just Mason, figuring out who he wanted to be without someone else's dreams crushing his own. As for me, I'd been applying for jobs like crazy, and 3 weeks after leaving home, I got an offer for a position that paid almost double what I'd been making before. The interview had gone incredible. Probably because for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the weight of an entire household on my shoulders. I could actually focus on my own goals, my own future, instead of constantly calculating how much I needed to keep other people afloat. I signed the lease on a small studio apartment. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Paid for with money that would actually stay in my bank account, instead of disappearing into my parents' endless financial black hole. The strangest part of building this new life was realizing how much energy I'd been spending on maintaining their world. Without all those bills to track, all those accounts to manage, all those emergencies to solve, I had time for things I'd forgotten I enjoyed. Reading, painting, actually sleeping through the night without anxiety dreams about overdraft fees. I opened a savings account for the first time in years and watched it actually grow instead of being constantly drained for family emergencies that were never really emergencies, just consequences of my parents' refusal to budget or plan or take responsibility for their own choices. Jenna threw me a small housewarming party at my new place, and Mason showed up with a piece of digital art he'd created, a phoenix rising from ashes. But the ashes were made up of tiny receipts and bank statements. I call it reclaiming, he said with a shy smile, and I hung it on my wall right above my desk where I'd see it every morning. We weren't going back to being their safety net, their scapegoat, their bottomless well of money and emotional labor. We were building something new, something that belonged only to us. And if that meant our parents had to finally face the consequences of their own dysfunction, well, that wasn't revenge. That was just life finally balancing the scales. Looking back on everything that happened, the thing that strikes me most isn't the betrayal or the revenge, or even the satisfaction of watching karma do its work. It's the clarity I gained about what family comes first actually means. For years, I'd internalized that phrase as a commandment, something that meant I had to sacrifice my own well-being, my own future, my own dignity for the good of people who happened to share my DNA. But the truth I learned, the truth that set me free, was simpler and harder than I ever imagined. Family comes first. Only works when you're actually counted as family, not just as a resource to be exploited. My parents had this whole philosophy built around family loyalty, but their version of loyalty only flowed one direction, from me to them, never the other way around. When I needed support, when I needed someone to have my back, when I needed to be treated like a person instead of a piggy bank, suddenly family didn't come first anymore. Suddenly it was about what I owed, what I should be grateful for, how selfish I was being for wanting basic respect and autonomy. The shocking truth was that I'd never been part of their family first equation. I'd been the sacrifice that made their version of family possible. The revenge everyone keeps asking me about, the part where I destroyed my parents' reputation and exposed their lies, wasn't really revenge at all when you think about it. I didn't fabricate anything, didn't exaggerate, didn't manipulate the truth to make them look worse than they were. All I did was stop participating in their fiction, stop pretending that everything was fine, stop protecting them from the natural consequences of treating their daughter like an ATM with feelings. The vengeance was just letting the truth exist in the open air instead of keeping it buried where it had been slowly poisoning me for years. What I want people to understand, what I wish someone had told me years ago, is that you don't owe your abusers your silence just because they raised you or fed you or put a roof over your head. Those were their legal obligations as parents, not favors you have to repay for the rest of your life. Real family, the kind worth putting first, doesn't demand that you set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Real family doesn't sell your independence and then bill you for the privilege of being exploited. And if exposing the truth about what they did makes you the villain in their story, well, maybe it's time to write your own story instead. So that's my story. From birthday betrayal to financial freedom, from being the family scapegoat to finally reclaiming my dignity and my life. But now I want to hear from you, because I know I'm not the only one who's been through something like this. Have you ever been in a situation where family loyalty was used as a weapon against you? Have you ever discovered that the people you trusted most were exploiting you behind your back? Drop a comment below and tell me your story. I read every single one. And honestly, knowing that other people have survived this kind of family drama and come out stronger is what keeps me going on the hard days. Here's what I'm really curious about. Do you think I went too far with the home flow reports? Or do you think my parents got exactly what they deserved? Was exposing the truth to the whole family an act of justice or an act of revenge? And does it even matter which one it was? Some people have told me I should have just walked away quietly, that airing the dirty laundry only makes things worse. But I genuinely want to know what you think. Would you have done the same thing in my position? Or would you have handled it differently? And if you've been the scapegoat in your own family, how did you break free? What was your moment of clarity, your point of no return? I also want to ask you this. Have you ever had someone in your life use phrases like family comes first, or you owe us, to manipulate you into giving more than you should? How did you handle it? Did you set boundaries? Or did you keep sacrificing until there was nothing left of yourself? Because I think one of the most important conversations we can have is about where family obligation ends and self-preservation begins. Share your thoughts, your experiences, your hard-won wisdom in the comments. This community is built on people supporting each other through the kind of toxic family dynamics that nobody else seems to understand. If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel seen or validated or just less alone in your own struggles, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another video. I share stories like this regularly, real, raw, unfiltered accounts of family betrayal, personal growth, and the messy journey toward reclaiming your life from people who never valued it in the first place. The next video might be exactly what you need to hear at exactly the right moment, so make sure you're part of this community. Let's keep having these difficult conversations together, because the more we talk about this stuff, the less power it has to shame us into silence. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.